Hello, my friends, and welcome to Perfect Practice. Today, we're going to be discussing what I think is probably, if not the most important topic for your business and for your clients, then at least certainly one of the most important topics, which is mental health and wellness. This day and age, I think it's very clear for us to see that if you live in North America, I think we're at a crisis level situation when it comes to mental health. And I think that's the greatest opportunity that we have as humans is to focus on our mental and emotional and spiritual well-being. Today I was doing a conversation with a group of people that I coach, and one of the things that I reminded them is that our body physically stops growing after a certain number of years. And for some of us, it even shrinks a little bit when we get shorter and smaller. However, there's a part of us that can grow forever and fill the entire space in the entire cosmos, I believe, at least. And that's our mental, emotional, and spiritual being. And so it's something that we can continuously work on. So no matter where you are in that journey, whether you feel like you're in the valley or even at the top of your mountain, there's always more to climb and there's always more work to do. So, with that being said, a few weeks ago, as synchronicity often has it, I met somebody who I have a strong feeling is going to become a really good friend of mine, and that's Laurie Teal. Laurie is technically a psychiatric nurse practitioner, but I think you'll soon learn to find that she does a lot more. And just like myself and many guests that we bring on, she's continued to evolve and sharpen her skills, pick up new tools, and incorporate those tools into helping her clients and communities that she coaches and trains and helping bring the best out in each and every one of them. And that is through the work that she does. So without further ado, Laurie, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Sachin. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk to your community. And what I would have to say is, I really look at mental health really not as mental health in like a box, really. Like what I think of standard of care of mental health is we look at everybody in a very small framework of
Mm.
the diagnostic statistical manual, right? And I'm quite frankly getting ready to have a burn party for that. To burn that. But really I think that mental health is health. Like without mental health we have no health, right? Because when we're feeling well and when we're feeling in a place of gratitude and we're feeling loved and loving and in the place of joy, when we feel spiritually connected, when we feel like we have a purpose and and some passion behind it, we have this amazing cascade of 1400 chemical responses that really affects every aspect of our being and our health. So mental health to me is it's health. It's just plain health, right?
Yeah, you bring up a really good point because it's kind of like what ingredient is the most important in baking a cake, right? You kind of need them all. So we need emotional health, mental health, physical health, spiritual health, and it's really all of those things combined that make the whole. And as they say, the sum is or the sum is greater than the parts. And
Right.
so when we put it all together, that's when we have exceptional health. From your perspective, why do you think we're in such a mental health crisis right now?
Oh boy, that's a big question. I think there's a lot of reasons why we're in such a big crisis. First of all, I think that there's a huge paradigm shift that's happening, and whether we call that a spiritual paradigm shift or like an evolutionary paradigm shift, we see many systems around us that, excuse me, I think are collapsing, right? Like our insurance systems, our healthcare systems. I work with a ton of teachers, and educational systems are collapsing. We see like the political questions and structures all across the globe, right? Not just in North America or the United States, but we see political systems kind of crashing and crumbling down. Um, we're looking at the realities of what does war really solve and not solve, and what the truth is behind some of that stuff. One of the benefits of the internet, I guess, is you can find a lot of information and follow the money, so to speak, right? So there's a
Hmm.
lot of like, we're at this place of, I think, really looking at what is the meaning and value of our lives, right? And what's kind of getting in the way for us living, quote, a life worth living, you know? So I think there's a real paradigm shift that's happening from kind of like this mentality of how much can we own, how big can we grow, how much do we have in our bank account, and all these things that at one time really led to us feeling like we had a sense of value. You know what? You got the house, you got the picket fence, you got the degrees. Well, why are you still unhappy? Right? Like, so I think that there's a huge shift that's happening from, this sort of materialistic, power driven aspect of life to, okay, when you get all that, and in the end, why aren't you still happy? And I think because there's something way more that's underneath that I think we've all been really missing, which is really connection,
Hmm.
Sachin, like really connection to other human beings, a level of equality, a level of just, you know, knowing that we're all enough. When I look at across the board, and I've unfortunately seen many people in my industry commit suicide or go to jail. And
Mm.
and it breaks my heart, but there's an aspect that, um there's this huge drive towards something else, and then in the end feeling so separate and so alone, so disconnected from themselves. And we all want to feel connected, we all want to feel like we have value, we all want to feel like we're loved. And I think oftentimes we work so hard striving to be and become something, and sometimes that striving is coming from such a deep sense of lack, a deep
Mm.
sense of disconnection from our own being. And I think a lot of that comes from not only our culture, but also comes from our childhood stories and generational stories. And I hope anyway we're on the cusp of something different.
I love to get into generational trauma because you brought it up there. But before I do that, I'm just curious when the switch flipped for you, because I can't imagine this is what you
Mm,
learned in school.
mm.
So when did you start to see mental health this way, or how is that? How has your journey shaped your
So
perspective?
I think that's been, quite frankly, Sachin, I'm 54. And so I think that really started with the birth of my first child. I was young, I was 19. And when right after she was born, her father came into the room intoxicated after the night before and wanted to hold her. And I saw the nurse look at me with that look in, that authoritative look and fear in her eyes, and something clicked inside of me. And I'm like, oh, this is really not a good story. So it wasn't long after that I left that relationship. And then, as life has it and patterns have it, because we repeat patterns over and over again till we don't need to anymore.
Mm.
And I met another man, and I thought that things were going so well, and I ended up getting really, really ill. And at that time in 1992, they diagnosed me with chronic fatigue syndrome. Now, I was in and out of the hospital, multiple IVs, all kinds of stuff. Nobody could tell me what was wrong with me till I saw a woo-woo chiropractor who started me on a journey of something, right? Of my body getting better. But I didn't really have any idea at the time that this illness was really serving me. Okay. But it's been trying to find answers to that and recover, so to speak, that, each step along the way has brought me to different places where I've had to re-look at generational trauma, my own trauma history, and the patterns that have kept me stuck. And at this point, I can honestly say to you, I have no longer have any symptoms of chronic fatigue syndrome. And I've learned that that illness was such a life-saving, uh, point in my life, because it really made me stop and take a look for the first time. Like, I couldn't work, and I was always like a worker, and really pushed myself amazingly in that, but I couldn't work. I literally had to have somebody take care of me for a while. I had a daughter that was the most important thing in my whole world, that I struggled to take care of because I could not, you know, take a shower and feel like I, could go on with the day. I needed to go back to bed. So it was all of, even the some of my childhood stories about wanting to be taken care of and I couldn't be taken care of, that this illness like really stopped me in my tracks and gave me opportunities to start looking and asking for help, number one, and start feeling like I was good enough to ask for help, and then start on my journey. And that led from seeing a woo chiropractor at the time and doing like liver flushes and gallbladder cleanses and all these things at the time in the early 90s was, you know a
It's
little
like
bit crazy, right?
way
Like
ahead
it's
of the curve.
weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. And started seeing somebody doing nutritional supplements with kinesiology and so forth. And like every little step starting to do a little bit more. And and as I did that, I started asking more questions about where did I come from and what was my childhood history, and my dad had abandoned us when I was really little, and like what was that story and how did that impact me, and started opening the idea of what is spirituality. If I don't have necessarily a mom and dad that can really be supportive and give me all that I needed at the time, and where do I get that from? And so started opening the door for spirituality, and then it just, as synchronicities happen, like doors began to open. And I even this is so interesting, I got accepted into a program through the Wellness Institute, which at the time was out of Issaquah, Washington, and they were training therapists in hypnotherapy and breath work. And it was, you started out with a 6-day training, and then you could go on up to, I think at that time it was 3 or 4 years. And I signed up for it, and I should not have been able to join that because I was an RN at the time. I wasn't a
Mm.
therapist, but I had been working in acute care psych, running groups, and so they let me join. And during that process session, it was so amazing because not only was I able to learn all these techniques, but I ended up staying with that program for 3 years, and I ended up working with the same 30 people all across the country. And we all became kind of a family, and we were doing our own work as we were learning, the way to work with other people. And not only were we doing that, we were doing vision quests, we're walking on hot coals, we're doing sweat lodges, we're learning meditation, we're learning about how everything is energy. Even then, like Bruce Lipton's work was right on the cutting edge at that time, you
Mm.
know? Um, and so that was one aspect that deepened my practice more. And then a few years after that, I'm like, oh, I really think I want to do shamanic training. And Alberto Vellato's program, I never even applied, and I got a letter in the mail saying I was accepted into the program. And so it's like,
Wow.
it's been those kinds of weird things that have kind of happened and continued to just show up in my life that I'm so grateful for.
Yeah, you're definitely quantumly entangled.
Yes.
I love that. I read your bio, and we're so much more than our bio, but I do want to draw people's attention to some of the work that you've done. So you use quantum biology in your practice, psychology, shamanism, hypnotherapy, breath work, homeopathy, and you individualize your care for people, using those as some of the tools in your tool belt. It's really wonderful to see the journey. I think that we're kindred spirits in many ways because my degree doesn't necessarily define me, nor does yours, right? Our titles can sometimes be very constrictive. And we talked about that before we started the recording that, I have to call myself this. And because that's what's required of me, I'd be curious, and this is kind of, you don't have to answer this now, but it would be a wonderful thought exercise. Uh, one of my mentors, Dan Sullivan, said that whoever names the game owns the game. And
Mhm.
because you're such an N of one, we all are, right, in our own way, but you're certainly an N of one. Uh, it's almost like we're playing it in somebody else's game who's playing by their own rules. And my friend Sally Hogsett taught me that different is better than better. And certainly what you do is different, which I think, in turn provides people with a better opportunity to reflect and to learn about themselves. And I think, in your sharing about chronic fatigue syndrome, thank you for sharing that. You talked about how illness was a gift,
Yeah.
uh, and not a curse, right? Some people see it as a curse. And I oftentimes get on calls with people and say, how can this be the best thing that ever happened to you? And if we start approaching it through that paradigm, then we just start looking at the problem differently. And
Right.
I remind people that if your body wanted to, kill you, it just has to stop breathing for 4 minutes. So let's get over the fact that your body isn't trying to kill you, because it's super efficient and meticulous. And if it wanted to do that, you wouldn't be here having this conversation. Your body's trying to keep you alive. And the intelligent adaptation to your environment doesn't feel so good because you're adapting to a toxic environment. And that could be what's going on around you, but that could also be what's going on up here. And I know the brain isn't just, we kind of technically think of the brain as being in the head, but your entire body is
Is your
the
brain.
brain, right? Exactly. So let's talk about generational trauma. Uh, where did that come in your understanding of your journey? But then, where can clinicians who are listening to this, or perhaps even people who are struggling with mental health challenges, thinking about this, where does and how does generational trauma come into play, and how can one? Do we all have it, and that's something we all need to explore, or and I think the answer might be yes, but how do we explore that, or how do we know that's the sticking point for us?
Well, I think it's not the sticking point. I think it's part of I think
Mm,
it's part of it, right? Like, so there's sticking points in our own life where we can say our trauma, and I think many people are familiar with big T's, little T's, you know what I mean? And to me, a trauma is anything that you perceive as a trauma, right? Because there are some people that have such horrific things that happen to them, and they really integrate the information into their nervous system as such, and they move on with their lives, and they really don't see it as a trauma. And maybe we could say that's suppression, maybe, who's to say, right? But they don't seem to have any real issue with it. One person's story, two siblings grow up in the same house, and they each have a totally different perception on what happened, when dad was drunk, for example, right? Like two different perceptions. And one's going to say it's trauma and one's not going to say it's trauma. And it's really just on that perception that somebody attaches to meaning, right, to that experience. And so when we talk about generational trauma, it's the same thing. I really feel like we have we can affect 7 generations in front of us, just like our indigenous people used to say, or native people used to say, and also 7 generations behind us that have been informing us. Okay.
mm,
And so if we talk about it from a psychiatric point of view, a mental health point of view, we can say, like, if mom and dad, if let's say mom grandparents grew up in the depression, and what was that like, and everybody was always worried about having enough, and there was always this state of anxiety and fear about whether the heat was going to stay on, and whether we were going to have bread, and we were rationing bread, and there's this whole energetic freeze response, worry response that happens around having enough. There's no way that those children don't pick up on that energy of fear and scarcity and all those things, and they grow up with that same information embedded, those same beliefs embedded in their brain and in their nervous system, right? And if they don't resolve that, then they're just recapitulating that same story. It just becomes a different, I don't know, it doesn't become about the depression. It becomes about whatever else is happening in life, right? So that story just gets overlaid onto the next generation. And I think that happens with all of us. We have a dear friend whose family, in her storyline, was at Austerlitz. And she is so incredible, and that was a couple of generations ago. And yet she's still so terrified to let go of any sort of control around what's happening in her community, and has some struggles with with opening up and feeling safe, and when her own upbringing was very safe. It doesn't make any rational sense, but those energetics and those story patterns are still informing her now. And I think oftentimes, like when I was doing my own work, you know um when you talked a little bit about the this idea of an illness sort of being victimized by an illness, right? And I think it's super important, Sachin, that we can all say, oh, I'm a victim at some point. It's okay, like we are okay.
Hmm.
But it's like when we stay stuck in that becomes the problem, because as the victim, when we start going, oh my god, what about me, right? That's a really important statement to have. What about me? Because in that place of what about me, we can actually start having some accountability. In that statement, there's actually value in you that you're not recognizing, because you're asking, what about me? So you're starting to recognize that you have your own sense of value in that statement. Now you got to keep moving forward, right? And not stay in that pattern. But it's important that we recognize that what about me is really important. And so in my own process, as I went through some of the stages, not only of how did my illness serve me, but also how my trauma served me, was that, I got to a point where it was like, okay, I can keep blaming people, right? Mom, dad, whatever, this circumstance, that circumstance, whatever. But in the end, what if we get to the point where we don't have to blame anybody? Not the 7 generations, because they all did the best that they could do at the time, right? But it's like, how can, if I, as soon as I stop blaming, now I actually have the freedom to choose, what is my path, what is my life, where do I want to go? And I got
Hmm.
to tell you, that's often way scarier than it is to stay than it is staying the victim. The freedom is scarier most of the time than it is staying stuck in an illness.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I hope I answered your question about generational trauma, but I think there's pieces along the way, and I think it's important to understand the generational patterns and where people got stuck and what their stories were, so that we can really honor them. Okay, because it's also this aspect of, we don't want to just, again, do that whole blame thing. I think we also have to move into a place where can we be in gratitude for their story and their suffering. And no parent goes into being a parent or grandparent, no one in that generational lineup really wanted to make things suck for the next 7 generations. Nobody wanted to do that. They were just doing the very best that they could, given the resources, what was available to them, the education, whatever. They did the best that they could. So how can we, stop the patterning now by owning our work and doing our work and healing? And how can we also be in gratitude for, oh my God, they went through so much suffering too for me to get to this place? What if part of their suffering was for me to get to this place?
Hmm. Yeah, that's very profound. What a great way to think of it. And, for all of us to kind of maybe even take a moment to reflect on all the generations that came before us, right? All the hardships that they had to go through, and, the challenges and struggles, and they were probably in true survivorship versus the comfort of the world we live in today. As uncomfortable as it might be for some of us, we still live in a pretty amazing time to be alive. And I think it's important for us to, in when it comes to decision making, and this is what I love about everything that you're sharing. It's very in align with the way I think and teach and try to practice my life. Is I told myself every decision I make, I want to make my ancestors proud. So the people that came before me, I'm imagining 7 layers back. They're all staring at me with, the decisions I make. And I'm considering, will my future generations thank me? Right. So will my ancestors be proud of me, and will my future generations thank me? And it makes decision making so much easier, even in the most minor decisions that you make. So for people who are indecisive, having that audience of all the people that came before you and the people that will come after you is such, for me, has been such a valuable tool. So yeah, honor your ancestors, and one of the ways we can honor them is by working on resolving that generational trauma, so we don't pass it down to the next generation.
Right, because we're going to do that because it's so embedded in our psychology and in
Hmm.
our nervous system. We are going to, like, I remember when my daughter was born, and the whole idea of, I'm not going to let, you know, the same patterns of trauma affect my daughter. I'm not going to do it the way my mom and dad did it, right? Like, that's the stance. And I see it in every 20-year-old that comes through my office. I'm not going to do it like my parents did it, right? No matter how good or bad it was. I'm not doing it like that. It's like, okay, great. Okay, so how do you expect not to do it like that? Just because you have the idea that you're not going to do it like that in the heat of something, guess what? You're going to do it just like that because
Hmm.
it's so embedded and you're so unaware of the level that it's embedded in your being, right? And we have to call
Yeah.
that stuff up into our awareness and into our consciousness so that we have a choice. Because if we're not stepping into it and wanting to discover more about it, whether it's out of inspiration, desperation, right? Whether if we're not stepping into it, into that awareness, and willing to look at it, it's going to keep recapitulating. There's no way it's not going to. And even at 53, with when I think about 54, when I think about all the work that I've done, there's still times where, I feel like patterns come around like a fractal. Um,
Hmm.
and there's still times when it comes around like, oh, I know this pattern. But once you know and have the awareness and some experience with working with it, now you have a choice that you can consciously choose something different, right? But when you're starting out the fractal and you're like caught up like this, and it's like so awful and there's so much suffering, and then all of a sudden you have a light of awareness that comes on, and you're like, wow, right? And you go, wow,
Hmm.
there's so much more room now, but look at my arms. Am I free? No. you know and then the storyline will come around again, the same pattern will come around again, and we might argue against it and swear and whatever for a little while and feel really victimized, and it might take us 6 months, 3 years, 10 years before we go, but it's still not this.
Mm.
But each part, I'd like to say, now when I get to that pattern thing that hits me, I'm like, okay, I accept it. It might only last a few hours. It doesn't generally last a few days anymore, right? It might last a few hours, and it's like, okay, how do I move this? How do I work with this? How do I bring meaning to this? How do I make different choices that are going to affect not only my own well-being, but my family and the next 7 generations?
As practitioners, thank you, on behalf of practitioners, and for the practitioners who are out there, you know, there's going to be certain patterns that they might see in their clients, uh, but it might start with identifying patterns in themselves. So, what are some patterns that we can look for in ourselves, or perhaps maybe you can extend that to others, that might be an indication that this is mental health is really where we need to start with this person? And again, with the understanding that it's all part of being healthy, where would yeah, so what are some patterns we might identify with people?
So I think the biggest thing that the patterns we need to identify, and this is kind of a soapbox that I stand on, Sachin, is that, um, at one point, maybe along the way, especially in psychiatry, we learn about codependency, and we learn about the victim triangle. And nobody wants to go, oh, I'm codependent. Like, we get all this weirded out about all this language stuff, right? But to me, well, not just to me, but I believe that there's only two emotions on this whole planet, and they're love or fear, right? Because if we talk about anger, anger is really just the disguise of fear. If we talk about guilt, fear, shame, fear, right? If we talk about sadness, usually it's sadness related to some level of fear of not being enough, not having what you need, whatever. Or it's a sadness related to there's love that's nowhere to go. When someone dies, we love them, and when there's this loss, there's so much love, and there's nowhere to like give it, right? And so sadness is kind of love with nowhere to go. So I feel like there's two emotions, love or fear. And I feel like all of us, we have this I'll call it this layer over top of the globe of humanity that is really the victim triangle. So victim, rescuer, and persecutor, and it's all held up by fear. So
Mm.
I think the biggest thing that we can each do is pay really close attention to when do we fall into that. If we're judging somebody, we're in fear, right? And so I think the biggest thing that we could do is really identify our own patterns of where we get stuck in that triangle. Because if you watch any Lifetime movie, you can start watching that victim triangle. Oh, look at so and so sad. She's waiting for Prince Charming to come. That's going to be really amazing. She's going to be rescued. And then, oh my God, he wants to tell me that I can't do this and do that. And now I'm feeling like I need to tell him to, whatever, back off. I'm going to run away from him. I'm going to use his credit card, whatever the story is. You know what I mean? But if you watch the news, if you watch any movie, you're going to see those patterns play out over and over and over again. And I think that when we look at even the history of people, right? We're no longer having to stay safe from the saber-toothed tiger and all of that. We're getting caught, we get stuck in that paradigm um, when we go to war with each other, when we're talking about um, natural resources. We even see that pattern in many religions, right? If you don't do this, you're going to go to hell, right?
Mm.
And so we get into that whole pattern even there. So what if we were to remove that pattern altogether? What would happen to us as humanity if we started choosing love over fear? What would happen? I mean, I got enough, you know, canned stuff to share with my neighbor. You know what I mean? I got enough toilet paper, which in the United States was a big deal during COVID. People were hoarding toilet paper. I
Oh
got
yeah.
enough toilet paper to share with somebody. You know what I mean? Like, how can we move more into that where everybody has value and everybody has purpose, and it doesn't matter what they look like, where they come from, what religion they choose, what gender they are, what sexual orientation they are. We're all just people trying to feel connected and feel like you know we can feel loved. That's it. It's so simple.
Yeah. What you're sharing reminds me of a quote from Ram Dass where he said, "We're all just walking each other home."
Yes, right.
And if we can see ourselves in others, Pramukh Swami says that our joy lies in the heart of others. And so I absolutely admire what you just shared, because what would that world look like, right? What would it look like if the question was, what would love do? And that was the answer that emerges from that, with whatever situation we're facing. There's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do things, and there's a way to do things with pure intention and love that might give us a third opportunity, a third answer to whatever question we ask.
Right. Exactly. Right. Like, what could we, instead of choosing out of fear, how do we choose from a place of love? And I
Mm.
also think, Sachin, that when we're looking at each other, whether we're a client or whether we're a practitioner or provider or whatever that means, we're all human beings. To me, there's no real hierarchy in that at all. We're all just human beings. And so looking at that pattern of where we get stuck in that triangle, that's where we give our power away. And when I say our power, it's our power to choose. Viktor Frankl, I'll never remember the quote exactly, but something like one of the man's last freedoms is his way of choosing and looking at the world. I mean, it was something like along that
Mm.
nature, right? And so if we can look at each of us as that in that pattern of where we get caught in that and where we give our power away to that, our power of love, our power of freedom, our power to choose, however you want to say it, the way that we think, you know um I don't know. I think that's the biggest thing that could really shift. Maybe it sounds grandiose, but I'm gonna start getting a little weepy. But I really believe that, like, if each of us took responsibility for that, that would be enough. That would just be enough. I'm not saying you have to give $10 million away. You have to, go feed people. I think if we all just did that as a basic start,
Hmm.
wow, it could be amazing, amazing.
What if we just did that for an hour? Like, imagine the world decided, like, I always thought, and maybe this crosses your mind as well, like, we have a bonus day every 4 years, right? So every 4 years, there's an extra day in February.
Right.
And I've always thought, like, that day just goes to waste. Like, that should be a day off. It's a day that only comes once every 4 years. It should be a day of celebration. Like, that should it comes more less frequently than New Year's does, and we celebrate like crazy when there's a new year, but every 4 years there's this extra day. So imagine a day like that where we just said, today we're going to ask, what would love do? And with this bonus day, just approach every thought, every person, every opportunity from that framework. And I think the world could shift very quickly. Imagine the healing that would take place, right? All the
Yeah.
conversations that haven't been had that would be had, the forgiveness that would take place. I mean, it would just be an amazing, amazing thing to witness and be part of. And, there's nothing stopping anyone who's listening to this right now, to do that. You don't have to wait for a leap year. You don't have to wait for the weekend. You could do that right now and just for the rest of the day, just challenge yourself. And I don't even think it's a challenge, but just remind yourself to pose that question. What would love do? How would love answer this email? How would love prepare this meal? How would love say thank you to the next person that does something nice for you? How would
Yeah.
love do something nice for somebody else?
And it's not just how would that impact the external world, because that is part of it, but how would that shape your internal world? How would that
Mm,
change how you feel about yourself and the value that you have for yourself? Because, my tagline says, "What if you're the one that you've been waiting for?" And I, another soapbox is it starts with me. It starts with you, not as a provider, but as a human being. Like it starts with me. And and so because I spent a long time in my life looking out the window waiting for somebody to come. my
mm.
my first husband, waiting for him to come home from work, looking out the window. I spent 17 years looking out the fucking window. you know and like no one came. Okay, so I need to come. And so what if I were to take that layer, what would love do, and like not only what does love do for everyone else, but how does that shape me when I come from that place? And how
Mm,
does it shape it when I say I'm going to come from a place of love for me first? Me first. Because when I love me first, everything else is so much easier. There is
yeah.
no triangle because
Yeah.
I'm full. I'm valued.
Yeah, there's a few quotes and thoughts that come to mind. One of them is, you got to, basically fill your own pot first, right? If you want to
Right,
pour into others. And then the other one is we've got to light our own candle, right? So if we just
right,
imagine a little candle wick on the top of our heads, it's so much easier to light other people's fires if ours is lit first, and it doesn't diminish our own. So
right.
it's a wonderful reminder that the things that we do to make the world a better place really starts by us becoming a better version of ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's a two-way street, right? When you do good unto others, it makes you feel good. I know you can probably speak to the chemistry of that better than I could. And when we share our gifts, but also we feel appreciated and valuable, there's a shift in our chemistry as well, which I think would be very powerful.
Totally, totally. And that's the power of, having people in your life that can also nurture you, right? But I'm not going to choose people in my life to nurture me if I don't first understand the value of who it is that I am, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's a practice and that's a progression, right? And then as we practice and we say goodbye to relationships that really don't serve us, that kind of keep us at a lower frequency, a lower vibe, that continue to pull us into that triangle. And when we start saying no to that, something amazing starts happening in the universe, where it just sort of starts pulling people together that are that resonate a little bit differently, right? And in those places now, there's an amazing husband in my life, like an amazing man of 14 years, right? There's amazing friends and colleagues in my life that now, just because we really work to keep each other out of the triangle, right? And in the place of love that's where real intimacy and real connection continues to grow. And guess what? When that happens, I get to have the opportunity to even learn more and more about me, because now there's a safe container for me to continue to, to develop whatever that is, spiritually evolve, consciously become more aware, um, step out of what I think my box is a little bit more, and grow a little bit more, and love a little bit more. Like, what are my limitations? I think we're, that pattern. Okay, well, maybe it's still here, but now I have this amazing support around me to help nurture that and nurture me in a different way. But it started with me loving me and saying no to some of those other things that weren't serving me. Right? Does that make sense?
Mm. Yeah, it does. I think it's we only have a certain amount of bandwidth and resource. And I think the best place to invest that bandwidth and resources in ourselves first, right? So it's like you got don't just fill the pot, but you've got to if you want to make coffee, you got to boil the pot.
Yes. And as you do that though, it's like our capacity to love grows more. Like when I was stuck in that cycle of, we'll just call it like a first marriage chronic fatigue syndrome cycle, right? And there was so much of my energy, even as I started to get better, that was still pouring out, still serving. I worked in acute care mental health for 26 years, and it was still pouring out and pouring out. And that was amazing and beautiful, because what happened was, as I poured that out and people responded, I got that fed back to me. Like, my value got fed back to me, right? But then there are other places along the way, like supervisors or whatever, other places that they really didn't see the value in some of those things. And so there was always like this little push pull thing that was happening. And I think that causes us to also grow. And but if we continue to do it, like I pour out so that I can see my value and it comes back, you know, we tend to get burned out in that way. There's no way in heck that any one of us decided to become a provider of anything, right? And health, because we wanted to necessarily be rich or whatever. Like, we did it because we wanted to help people.
Mm.
And maybe it came from a place of helplessness early on in our lives, where we felt helpless and we needed to do something. And so that was the impetus of wanting us to help other people, right? But we can also get to the point where we get so burnt out because we're looking for our value. And I don't think this is conscious, but I think we're looking for our patients to give us value, right?
Mm.
And that's where we end up with boundary violations. That's where we end up feeling burnt out. That's where, sometimes providers make decisions that get a little scary. And, I've had a couple of people that I was quite close to at one time that ended up going to jail for boundary violations. A couple of providers who ended up committing suicide, you know, because we have a great capacity to hold love. But I think as we do our work and as we put ourselves more first and in a loving way, we are actually growing our capacity to care more for people, not care less for people. And whenever I
Mm.
talk about loving ourselves more, I hear people say, well, isn't that a little selfish? And I think, yeah, I guess it is a little bit selfish, you know? Um, but selfish in like a nasty negative way, I think we've been taught something really inappropriate about that word selfish. I think we have to become a little bit selfish about our own value and this is our own life. This is our life.
Mm.
And we can give more of ourselves, and we have more capacity to give more when we're coming from a place that's more out of love and instead of out of fear.
Yeah, the I'm getting a lot of visual downloads as you're speaking, and so I'm really enjoying our conversation. And the download that I'm getting as you're saying that is I'm thinking of a light bulb that's just kind of dim and flickering, right? And so if that light bulb were to shine bright and consistently, right, because it's getting the energy that it needs and doing the work
Right.
that it needs to be doing, you would never call it selfish,
Right.
right? You would see that it's serving its purpose. And so if our job is to bring light into other people's lives, and we're kind of the dimmer switch is turned all the way down and we're kind of flickering, I think it's really selfish of us and irresponsible of us not to work on our own light,
Right.
right? And to be that bright shining light, and to show people what's possible, right? Especially as providers. I mean, listen, I understand we all have unique situations and circumstances, and it's not about where we're at, because where we're at isn't who we are. It's
Right.
really about continuing to walk that path and listening
Right.
to conversations like this, perhaps even working with someone like yourself and doing that internal work that's required for us to shine bright. I mean, that's the most selfless thing that we can do, because when a light bulb shines bright, it's not for itself. It's to illuminate the path for others.
Yes, it's to be a reflection. And listen, we're always a reflection of each other. But what vibration do we want to be a reflection of? Do we want to be a reflection of the trauma? Do we want to be a reflection of the pain and suffering? Or do we want to be the reflection of love and freedom?
Mm, beautifully said. I love it. I could talk. I said this earlier. I could talk to you all day, and I wasn't kidding. There's
Oh, thank you.
so much alignment in the way we think,
Thank
and such an important message. I think that's another thing I wanted to share, is that um, we're fortunate. It's unfortunate that people are struggling, but we're very fortunate that people like you are doing this work,
thank
that
you.
are, providing such valuable insights and a different way of healing, right? Instead of masking symptoms, and sometimes it might be necessary, but instead of masking symptoms and numbing people with medications,
Yeah.
you're facilitating them to do the work that's actually required, so that they don't keep passing this on from generation to generation to
Right.
generation. And I love the context of which you look at somebody, is, honoring their heritage, but also acknowledging their lineage and the people that'll come after them. It just makes the work even so much more meaningful, because if you think about it, one person, 7 generations isn't 7 people,
Nope. It's
right?
a
It's a lot of people.
lot.
But I'd have to do the math, but you can only imagine, like, even if it's just 2 to the exponent 7, that's a pretty substantial number of people that will be
Yes.
impacted by the work.
Yeah. Well, think about the number that you've impacted in your life, Sachin, and then multiply that by 7 generations. I mean, alone. I mean, that's
Mm,
a lot of people.
yeah, it really puts things in perspective. Thank you.
Right. 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 And just because we don't know the story of the person bagging our groceries, the fact that we are able to like approach them with our light and be kind and smile and say thank you and have gratitude, I mean, that could change that whole person's day, maybe more than that. Who knows? Right?
Hmm.
I mean, it's that simple. So it's not even the people we're constantly in contact with. It's anybody that we're in contact with.
Yeah, I mean,
Anybody
you
that
could change somebody's story,
right,
right?
right.
Like, their perception of the world might be, people suck, like people are so mean, like nobody's grateful, and then they encounter you, and their entire perception of humanity can change. Which,
Yeah,
I
just a
mean, we
little
can only.
glimmer of hope is like just, is so powerful.
Hmm. This is awesome. I'm really enjoying our conversation. We'll have to do a part two,
All
as
right, sure.
so I'm planting that seed and invitation to come back on. And in the meantime, how can people learn more about the work that you're doing? I'd love to get them to plug into your network and your community, and also, where can we continue to follow you and learn more from you?
Oh, sure. So, thank you. You can check out my website. It's literally very easy, lauriebtlnpp.com. And you can sign up for a newsletter there if you like. People like that way. People are able to find out ongoing workshops. I do workshops and retreats. I also offer intensives where someone can come and spend anywhere from 3 to 5 days with me, and that's really built around each individual and what that individual's needs are. I can bring in other providers to also help serve at that during that time, and offer activities for integration time that would be fun. So I guess the newsletter, going to the website and signing up for a newsletter to stay on top of some of that would be a good way to do that. I am working on a program that I can offer to people who are not necessarily working one on one with me, but would offer some really good information and some ongoing skills that they can do even before they come to see me, or just utilize themselves. So that's on my list of things to do, Sachin. But I guess the easiest way would be there. I'm also on the medical board of an amazing AI platform called IAFit, and
Hmm.
IAFit has a very small intention, which is to raise the consciousness of the planet. And what I love about this AI platform, it kind of fell into my lap. It was not anything I really thought I would get involved with. It kind of fell into my lap, and what I love about it is that the whole platform is built on a state of coherence. So anything that you're doing, whether you're asking, to help with a journal prompt or help to rewrite a PDF of some sort or whatever, everything is delivered in the state of coherence. So as you're reading it, you're actually becoming more heart focused. And what I mean by coherence is your heart is now giving information to your brain. And when that happens, when you're in that state of coherence, 1,400 chemical responses happening. Very, very well researched by the Heart Math Institute. So
Hmm.
grateful for the work that they do. And um, there's sonic supplements that are on there to help you with anything from sleep, attention and focus, increase your energy to do a really big workout. There's so many different ways that you can use iFit, and it's just a blast. So I encourage people to check that out, see what they think about that, and see if it's a fit for them. And I guess that's what I have to say, Sachin.
Well, thank you. Thank you for, again, the work that you do. Thanks for taking time out of your day and spending it with
It's my
myself
pleasure.
and our community. And I have a strong feeling, aside from the second episode that we'll record together, uh, that I feel like we're gonna do a lot of good in the world as a collaborative effort. So I'm so grateful that we have met. So grateful to get to know you even more deeply during our conversation today. And here's to an amazing, amazing end to the year and start to a whole new year. Much love, much light, and thank you for taking the time to be here.
Thank you, Sachin. You too, sweetie.
All right, friends. Well, there you have it. The amazing Laurie Teal. I hope you enjoyed our conversation today. I know I certainly did. Got lots of goosebumps, got lots of downloads, and lots of opportunities to reflect. My big takeaway from this, Laurie, just in closing here, that you may not even know unless I tell you, is that I think I've been a little bit too hard on my son, and passing down some of that generational trauma of it's never good enough. So I can't wait until he gets home to tell him how proud I am of him, and maybe to let off the gas pedal a little bit and let him grow into the man that he needs to grow into, and um, just be a quiet observer instead of somebody who's trying to shape him, so I can really witness who he is. So thank you for that. I think that was
You're
my
welcome.
my powerful lesson to take away.
And that's the benefit, Sachin, of just being in conscious communication and in conscious relationship with other people, right? Because none of us are ever going to be perfect. It's not, I
Mm,
think that's unrealistic. We're perfect in our imperfection. And isn't it just amazing that you even have the awareness and the desire to do something different, and give yourself some kudos for that and some love for that, because you love him so much. You're willing to just make it be less about you and more about watching him blossom into his potential, right? And that takes amazing courage to be able to do that and let go of control. So give yourself
thank
some
you.
kudos for that, okay? And that's
Well
what
received.
it's so important for us to have community where we can come together and talk about those things, because you know we need each other. We can't do this solo.
You're absolutely right. Thank you for bringing that out in me. I receive your acknowledgement. And again, thank you. And for those of you that are listening, the links that Laurie mentioned will be in the show notes. So go grab them there. Check out her amazing work. I'm on her newsletter, just received it last week. It's very, very grounding and very centering. So it's a great anchor point for me. Thank you for that as well. All
Welcome.
right, friend. Well, have a wonderful day, everyone. And here's to your health, happiness, and wholeness. Bye for now.